My brother stole $30,000 from my restaurant's grand opening. He thought I wouldn't notice. He didn't count on the fact that I still had a key to his art studio. 3 days later, his prestigious gallery show was cancelled. His reputation was in tatters. And my parents were on the phone, screaming that I had maliciously and methodically destroyed his future. They were right. I did. And I'd do it again. This isn't a story about forgiveness. It's a story about finally sending the bill. It was supposed to be the best night of my life. For 2 years, I'd poured every dollar, every waking hour, every drop of sweat into this dream. A pop-up restaurant called Hearth and Vine. The setting was pure magic. The old, neglected grounds of my family's vineyard. A place that hadn't produced a decent bottle of wine in 20 years, but held the ghosts of every happy childhood memory I owned. I'd strung fairy lights through the gnarled branches of ancient oak trees. We had long rustic wooden tables set up under the stars, each one adorned with wildflowers and hand-thrown pottery I'd bought from a local artist. The air smelled of rosemary, grilled lamb, and the promise of a future I was building with my own 2 hands. I'm Chloe. I'm a chef. Not the screaming plate-throwing kind you see on TV, but the quiet, focused kind. The kind who believes that food is a story, and every dish is a chapter. My story was about reclamation. Reclaiming this land, reclaiming my time, reclaiming a narrative for myself that wasn't written by my family. My family. Well, they were there. My mother, looking effortlessly chic in a linen dress, floated among the guests, accepting compliments as if she'd personally hand-rolled the pasta. My father, a man whose spine seemed to have been replaced by a question mark years ago, hovered near the wine bar, nodding vaguely at conversations. And then there was Leo, my older brother, the artist. He was helping that night, which in Leo speak meant he'd shown up an hour late, wearing a paint-splattered shirt as a personality trait, and was now leaning against a pillar, looking tortured and profound for anyone who cared to notice. He was a black hole of need dressed in a human suit. My right hand, my sous chef, my work-life soulmate, was Maya. She's 24, whip-smart, with a hawk's eye for detail and a loyalty so fierce it was humbling. I'd hired her when she was a culinary school dropout, with no experience but a fire in her eyes I recognized. Tonight she was the engine room of the whole operation, a blur of motion and quiet commands, ensuring every plate that left the kitchen was perfect. The restaurant was my dream, but Maya was the one who helped me bolt it to reality. We had over 100 guests, a sold-out night, and the buzz was electric. Critics were there, investors I'd courted for months, the kind of people whose opinion could turn my pop-up dream into a brick-and-mortar reality. Everything was on the line. I felt the familiar thrum of adrenaline, the sharp, clean focus of service. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The tension had been simmering all week, a low hum of resentment beneath the surface of familial obligation. While I was hauling lumber for the outdoor kitchen and negotiating with produce suppliers at 4 a.m., Leo was sleeping in until noon in his childhood bedroom. When he did grace us with his presence, it was to offer unsolicited artistic direction. "You know, Chloe," he said, swirling a glass of wine he hadn't paid for, "this is all very commercial. It's competent. But does it have a soul?" This from a man whose last artistic endeavor was a series of canvases, painted entirely black, that he titled Urban Void. My mother would rush to his defense. "Leo, darling, don't bother your sister. She's stressed. Chloe, be nice. Your brother is just trying to help." Her help was a constant gentle pressure to accommodate Leo's moods, his needs, his fragile ego. She'd bring him coffee, but ask me why the napkins weren't folded correctly. She'd praise a sketch he'd done on a cocktail napkin while critiquing the font on my menus. It was a masterclass in subtle invalidation. My father's role in the drama was one of strategic absence. Whenever Leo started one of his monologues about the soullessness of capitalism, or the burden of true genius, my dad would suddenly remember a very important task he had to do on the other side of the property, like inspecting a vine or staring at a cloud. His silence was its own kind of betrayal. A quiet vote for the status quo. A desperate plea to not rock the boat. The most infuriating part was Leo's upcoming gallery show. It was all he talked about. He'd secured a spot in a trendy downtown gallery, a major step for him. He spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones, as if he were about to cure a disease. "The curator says my work is bravely confrontational," he'd announce to anyone who would listen. He needed a significant deposit to secure the space and fund the framing, and he talked about it constantly. A heavy sigh always attached to the end of the sentence. "I just don't know how I'm going to pull it together," he'd lament, looking pointedly at our parents, who would look at him with endless, bottomless sympathy. Meanwhile, I was self-funded. I'd cashed out my 401k from a previous corporate job. I'd taken a small, terrifying business loan. Every plate, every chair, every single sprig of time was paid for with my own risk. The contrast was a chasm between us. He was waiting for the world to recognize his genius. I was working to build my own. During the setup, he'd walk through my kitchen, picking a fresh fig off a tray, and say things like, "Must be nice to have a clear path. Art is a much rockier road." I'd just bite my tongue, the metallic taste of anger mixing with the salt on my lips, and keep working. I knew this night had to be a success, not just for my future, but as a silent, definitive answer to all of it. The night was a blur of triumphs. The food was flowing, the wine was pouring, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. A major food critic pulled me aside and told me my lamb dish was a revelation. An investor I'd been courting for months gave me a firm handshake and said, "Send me your business plan tomorrow." By 11 p.m., as the last dessert plates were being cleared, I finally allowed myself to breathe. I leaned against the kitchen doorframe, watching the happy, glowing faces of my guests, and felt a wave of dizzying relief. We did it. That's when Maya found me. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her face was pale under the warm glow of the lights, and her hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. "Chloe," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have a problem." My heart did a familiar, sickening lurch. "What is it? Did a health inspector show up? Did we run out of gas?" "No," she said, shaking her head. She led me back into the temporary office we'd set up in the old wine tasting room. On the desk was the cash box, the credit card reader, and a neat stack of bank deposit bags. "It's the cash payments." We'd had a significant number of guests pay in cash, a mix of ticket sales at the door and extra wine purchases. It was a thick, heavy stack of bills. I counted it twice, Maya said. And then I had Marco from the bar count it. We're short. Short? How short? I asked, my blood turning to ice. Maya took a deep breath. $30,000, exactly. The number didn't compute. It was too large, too precise. It was the exact amount of my seed money for the down payment on a permanent location. It was my future. That's impossible, I stammered. Where's the deposit slip? Who was supposed to take it to the night drop? Maya just looked at me, her expression a mixture of pity and dread. Leo, she said softly. Your mom said he wanted to help with the wrap-up. He said you'd asked him to handle the bank run, and there it was. The click. The sudden, horrifying clarity. I hadn't asked him. I would never ask him. He'd volunteered. He'd taken the cash bag, zipped it up, and walked out with a martyred look on his face like he was doing us all a huge favor. I remembered the moment clearly now. He'd patted me on the shoulder and said, Don't worry, little sister. I got this. And I, in the chaotic joy of the moment, had just nodded and thanked him. I looked at the cash box, at the remaining bills, and then at Maya's worried face. The beautiful music of the party outside suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. He hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen my dream, packaged it up in a bank bag, and walked away with it under the stars. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something inside me went very, very still. A switch flipped. The warm, buzzing joy of the evening was extinguished, replaced by a cold, crystalline rage. It was so pure, so potent, it felt less like an emotion, and more like a law of physics. I walked out of the office, a serene smile plastered on my face. I moved through the remaining guests, thanking them for coming, my voice even and calm. I hugged my mother, who was beaming. Wasn't Leo wonderful tonight? She gushed. So helpful. He's really coming into his own. He really is, I said, and the words tasted like ash. I oversaw the entire breakdown of the event with robotic efficiency. I made sure every last glass was washed, every table folded, every supplier paid from the credit card receipts. Maya watched me with a worried expression, occasionally asking if I was okay. I'd just nod and give her another task. I was compartmentalizing. I was building a wall inside my head, and on the other side of that wall, a plan was beginning to form. A cold, hard, and meticulously detailed plan. When I finally got into my car around 3 a.m., the exhaustion I should have felt was gone, burned away by the fury. I didn't drive home. I drove to my parents' house. I parked down the street and just watched the lights, my hands gripping the steering wheel. He was in there, sleeping in his old room. $30,000 of my blood and work probably stashed under his bed. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He thought I was the same Chloe, who would eventually sigh, cry, and then swallow the injustice to keep the peace. He thought the family mythology, the one where he was the fragile genius, and I was the capable workhorse, would protect him. He was wrong. I went home, showered, and laid out my clothes for the next day. Then I went to the small, unassuming junk drawer in my kitchen. And there it was, on a tarnished old keychain from a trip to France years ago. The spare key to his downtown art studio. He'd given it to me 2 years ago in case of an emergency, which I knew meant in case he got locked out while drunk. He'd long since forgotten about it, but I hadn't. I held the cold metal in my palm. This wasn't just a key anymore. It was a reckoning, This wasn't the first time Leo had burned my future to warm his hands. To understand the coldness in my heart that night, you have to go back 8 years. I was 22, just graduating from culinary school at the top of my class. I was scrappy, ambitious, and I had just won the one thing that was going to change my life: the prestigious Dubois Scholarship. It wasn't just tuition. It was a 1-year apprenticeship at a 2 Michelin star restaurant in Paris. It was a plane ticket out, a foot in the door, a golden key to a world I had only ever dreamed of. It came with a $20,000 stipend for living expenses. $20,000. To me, it was a fortune. It was my everything. I remember my parents' reaction. They were proud in their own way. My mother called all her friends. My father patted me on the back and said, "Well, look at that." But Leo was a different story. He was 25 at the time, in the throes of what he called his postmodern crisis, which involved him breaking up with a girlfriend who had told him his poetry was a bit much, and him deciding that the world was too cruel for his sensitive soul. 2 weeks before I was supposed to fly to Paris, the crisis reached its peak. I came home to find my mother in tears and my father pacing the living room. Leo had apparently had a complete breakdown. He'd smashed a lamp, declared his life meaningless, and locked himself in his room. A therapist my mother found, one who specialized in gifted and sensitive adults, recommended an immediate intervention, a high-end holistic wellness retreat in Arizona that cost, you guessed it, almost exactly $20,000. My mother approached me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Chloe, honey, we need to talk." She explained the situation, framing it as a life-or-death matter. "Your brother is in a very dark place," she said. "This is the only thing that will help him. We don't have that kind of money liquid right now." I knew where this was going. The blood drained from my face. "No," I said. "Absolutely not. That's my scholarship money. It's for my rent in Paris. It's for my life." "It's just money, Chloe," she replied, her voice taking on a slightly wounded tone. "This is your brother's well-being. His spirit. You're so strong. You'll figure it out. You always do. We'll pay you back, of course, the moment we can." My father stood behind her, nodding in silent, miserable agreement. They weren't asking. They were telling. They had already made the decision. My tangible, hard-won future was being sacrificed for his abstract, undefined spirit. I fought. I screamed. I cried. I reasoned. I laid out the sheer, crushing unfairness of it all. But it was like arguing with the tide. In their eyes, my success was a resource to be tapped, while his failure was a crisis to be managed. His needs, because they were louder and more dramatic, were always more urgent. In the end, they took the money. They transferred it from my account, which my mother was still a co-signer on, just in case of emergencies. The irony was so bitter it choked me. Leo went to his retreat, which, from the photos he later posted, looked more like a luxury spa. He came back a month later with a tan and a newfound interest in pottery. I didn't go to Paris. I couldn't. I deferred the apprenticeship, but without the stipend, I couldn't afford the move. The momentum was lost. The dream died. They never paid me back. It was never mentioned again. It became another one of the family's silent, heavy secrets. I stayed, got a job as a line cook at a steakhouse and started saving again. Dollar by painful dollar. But something inside me broke that day. The soft, hopeful part of me that believed in fairness, that believed my accomplishments were my own, hardened into something else. It hardened into a promise. Never again. I would never again let my future be collateral damage for his failures. The next morning, I drove to his studio. It was in a gritty industrial part of town, the kind of place artists move into before the gentrifiers follow. I let myself in with the key. The air inside was thick with the smell of turpentine and self-importance. Canvases were everywhere. Large, imposing canvases. And on a table, I saw it. The spoils of his crime. Stacks of brand-new, high-end, Belgian linen canvases. A fresh set of German oil paints that cost a fortune. And, tucked under a sketchbook, a receipt. A receipt from the gallery, dated the previous afternoon, for a cash payment of $15,000, the security deposit for his show. The rest of the money was likely for materials and framing. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had immediately converted my hard work into his artistic fantasy. He had literally painted over my dream with his own. I took out my phone and photographed everything. The receipt, the new supplies, the studio. I built my case with the same quiet precision. I used to build a complex dish. Each photo was an ingredient in the truth I was about to serve him. Then I drove to my parents' house. I knew they'd all be there, probably having a late, celebratory brunch, rehashing the success of the party. I walked in without knocking. They were in the kitchen, just as I'd pictured. My mother was humming. Leo was sipping coffee, looking pleased with himself. "Chloe! Darling, what a surprise!" my mother said, her smile faltering slightly when she saw the look on my face. "Where's the money, Leo?" I asked. No preamble, no small talk. He feigned confusion, a skill he had perfected over a lifetime. "What are you talking about? What money?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice dangerously low. "The cash from last night. There's $30,000 missing from the deposit." My mother immediately stepped in, placing a protective hand on Leo's arm. "Chloe, what a horrible accusation! Your brother was helping. There must be some mistake. You were probably just tired and miscounted." "I didn't miscount," I said, my eyes locked on Leo. "Maya counted. Marco counted. It's gone. And you were the last one to touch the bag." Leo let out a long theatrical sigh. "I can't believe this. After I went out of my way to help you." "I dropped it at the bank's night depository, Chloe. Just like you asked. If the bank made a mistake, that's on them. Don't come in here attacking me." He was so smooth, so practiced. The victim in an instant. "Really?" I said, pulling out my phone. "Because I just came from your studio." I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. Just a tiny one, but it was there. "The studio you paid the gallery deposit for yesterday afternoon? $15,000. In cash. What a coincidence." I showed them the photo of the receipt. The air went still. My mother stared at the phone, her brain refusing to connect the dots. My father looked at the floor. Leo, for the first time, looked cornered. He started to stammer. I had some money saved. From a commission." "A commission?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You haven't sold a painting in 3 years, Leo. Let's stop lying." And then, the pivot. The classic, textbook move of the guilty. My mother turned on me. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You went into his private studio? You snooped around his things? What is wrong with you? That is an incredible violation of his privacy. He stole $30,000 from me!" I yelled, the cold control finally cracking. "That was my restaurant. My down payment. He didn't just steal money. He stole my entire future. And you're angry about his privacy? It's just money, Chloe!" she shrieked, echoing the words from 8 years ago. The words that had been branded on my soul. "Your brother is on the verge of a major breakthrough. He needed this. You're successful. You have your little business. You can afford it. Why do you always have to be so selfish? So ungenerous?" That was it. The final nail. It was never about a mistake. It was a conscious choice. They knew. Maybe they didn't know the specifics, but they knew Leo needed it, and they knew I would be the one to pay the price. They saw my success not as something to be celebrated, but as a family resource to be plundered for the sake of the designated failure. "Okay," I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. "Okay, I see." I looked at Leo, whose face was a mask of sullen resentment. I looked at my mother, her face twisted in righteous indignation on his behalf. I looked at my father, who was staring at me with a look of pleading, begging me to just let it go, to keep the toxic peace. "You have 24 hours to get me my money," I said, my voice flat and empty of emotion. "All of it, or I go to the police, and I press charges." Leo scoffed. "You wouldn't." I held his gaze. "I went to your studio, Leo. I think we both know what I'm capable of when I'm motivated." I turned and walked out the door, the sound of my mother yelling my name behind me. I didn't look back. The bridge was burning, and I was the one holding the match. The fallout was swift, but not in the way they expected. I didn't wait for their 24 hours. I knew they would just use that time to manipulate me, to rally the family against me, to craft a narrative where I was the villain. I wasn't playing their game anymore. I was changing the rules. That afternoon, I didn't call the police. That would be messy, public, and would give them a stage for their drama. My plan was more precise. It was surgical. I looked up the name of the owner of the gallery where Leo was scheduled to have his show. Her name was Victoria Sterling, a woman with a formidable reputation and a zero-tolerance policy for unprofessionalism. I found her direct line. When she answered, I kept my voice calm, professional, and devoid of emotion. "Miss Sterling, my name is Chloe Vance. My brother, Leo Vance, has a show scheduled at your gallery next month. I'm calling about the deposit he paid you yesterday." "Yes?" she said, her voice wary. "I'm afraid those funds were not his to spend," I said. "He stole them from my business. I have proof of the theft, and proof that he used that money for your deposit. I'm considering filing a formal police report, but I felt it was only fair to inform you first that the gallery is currently in possession of stolen funds. I'm sure you wouldn't want to be entangled in a fraud investigation." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. A scandal. Police involvement. Her gallery's pristine reputation smeared by some family drama. "I see," she said finally, her voice glacial. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Miss Vance. We will be handling this internally. Can you please forward me your contact and banking information?" I did. An hour later, I got a notification from my bank. A wire transfer for $15,000 from Sterling Gallery. The subject line read, "Deposit refund, L. Vance." Later that day, Leo called me, his voice a strangled mix of fury and disbelief. "They canceled my show. Victoria called and said they were terminating the contract. She wouldn't even give me a reason. What did you do?" "I introduced her to the truth, Leo," I said. "It's a concept you might want to get familiar with. You have until tomorrow to get me the other half." I hung up. The next day, my parents showed up at my apartment. They didn't come to apologize. They came to attack. They called me jealous, vengeful, cruel. They said I had deliberately sabotaged my own brother at the peak of his career, out of spite. They never once used the word stole. In their version of the story, he had simply borrowed or used the money. My actions, however, were malicious and unforgivable. I just stood there and let them vent their poison. When they were finally done, breathless and red-faced, I said, "Is that it? Are you finished?" I wrote down the name and number of a family therapist on a piece of paper and handed it to my mother. "I'm done being the family shock absorber," I said. "Get help." The remaining $15,000 appeared in my account the next day. I have no doubt my parents paid it, draining whatever savings they had to clean up his mess one last time. I had my money back. I had my seed capital. But I had lost my family. Or maybe I had finally freed myself from them. The line was so thin I couldn't tell the difference. I was alone, standing in the rubble of what we used to be, and all I felt was a profound, quiet, and liberating peace. It's been 6 months since that night. I used the money, all of it, as the down payment on a beautiful brick-and-mortar space downtown, just a few blocks from Leo's former gallery. Hearth and Vine is set to open in the fall. Maya is my official chef de cuisine and a partner in the business. We're building it together, on our own terms, with no strings attached. The lesson in all of this is not as simple as stand up for yourself. It's deeper and more painful than that. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to be your safe harbor are actually the storm. I learned that the phrase, "blood is thicker than water," is often used to justify drowning you. The unconditional love we crave from family shouldn't be a one-way street, flowing from the capable to the chaotic without end. True family isn't about shared DNA. It's about shared respect. It's about the people who see your light and don't try to dim it to make themselves feel brighter. It's Maya, who stayed late to count the money. It's my friends who brought me coffee and let me cry without judgment. It's the family you choose, not the one you're born into. Severing ties with my parents and brother was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, an amputation of a part of myself. But it was also an act of survival. I had to cut away the infected limb to save the rest of me. I don't hate them. I don't wish them ill. I just wish them somewhere else, far away from me, and the life I am so carefully, so lovingly, building for myself. I got the receipt for my stolen future, and I cashed it. And in doing so, I finally bought my own freedom. I know this story might be controversial. I know some of you will think I went too far, that I should have been the bigger person, that I should have found a way to forgive. Maybe you're right, or maybe you've never had your back against the wall, with the people who should be protecting you holding you down. What would you have done? Have you ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself from drowning? I'd genuinely love to hear your stories and your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.